friends. Welcome to another episode of the Clinical Trial Podcast. I'm your host, Kunal Sampat, where my job is to help you accelerate your clinical research career. Managing and leading a clinical research organization can be complicated business. A CRO leader has to manage not only sponsor and site expectations, but also develop internal talent and maintain profitability. A great CRO partner can jumpstart a clinical trial for an academic or industry sponsor with little or no clinical trial resources or experience. On the flip side, it can be difficult to identify a CRO partner that is the right fit for the sponsor organization. To bring more CRO insights to you, I invited Dr. Philip Räth, Managing Director of Palleos Healthcare, to the podcast. Dr. Räth has close to 15 years of expertise in the medical product industry. Palleos is a Central European full-service CRO focused on medical product development, including preclinical consulting and clinical services for large and small-scale clinical trials. This German-based CRO operates in 19 countries, has experience working on over 336 projects across 23 therapeutic areas. Since joining the Palleos team in 2011, Dr. Räth has held pivotal roles in business development, finance, data management, and has extensive experience in full-service clinical trials, specifically investigator-initiated studies, as well as computerized software validation. Dr. Räth holds a PhD in business administration with specialization in management information systems. His primary interest lies in developing digitally driven strategies for clinical trials, as well as current developments in AI and their impact on the industry. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Philip Räth to the Clinical Trial Podcast.
Great clinical research professionals aren't born, they're built. In each episode, hear from leading experts in clinical trial management as they inspire and motivate you to become an effective leader. Welcome to the Clinical Trial Podcast. Here to help you accelerate your career is your host, Kunal Sampat.
Philip, thank you so much for joining me on the Clinical Trial Podcast today. I'm really excited to have you on the show, and I believe you're my first or maybe second European guest. So I'm really happy to have you part of this conversation and make this a diverse and rich podcast interview.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's my second podcast, so looking forward to have this conversation as well.
That's awesome. I think to just orient people, I know we briefly met before and you were telling me about like your background and so on, but I think it would be helpful for people to understand. I know you currently lead a CRO in Europe, so maybe you could tell a little bit about that. And then how did you get into clinical trials and to doing what you do right now?
Yeah, I mean, just to give you some insight on my current situation. So I'm the Managing Director of Palleos Healthcare. We are a German-based CRO out of Wiesbaden, which is next to Frankfurt. Some US people know Wiesbaden well. We have a big US military base here. So I come across a lot of people in cabs and so on that essentially know Wiesbaden. And so essentially we are a full-service CRO, phase 1 to phase 4, with a focus on phase 2 and 3, given our focus on Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So these multinational studies on a, let's say, medium-size level with a typical biotech customer, I'd say that's our sweet spot. That's what we mostly do. I think that would be the short story of what we do. So how did I get here? I think it's a longer story. I think my background is a bit unusual for the industry, I'd say. I studied business administration initially and moved towards a mix of IT and business administration back then called management information systems. So essentially studying the interface between implementing information systems and organizational theory. So what does an information system do to an organization, or other way around, what does an organization do to the information system? And back in the day, it was around 2008 when I started with a PhD, social media became big, and I studied essentially what social media does in organizations, right? So essentially you could think of like an internal Facebook or stuff like that, which was new to organizations because you could skip hierarchical lines and basically officially build other networks than that. And so I was studying that from an implementation perspective, understanding what it does to an organization and how it impacts organizations. I did a couple of different things, tried to, when the e-commerce wave hit, based on a bet with my uncle and my brother. We did a shoe store in the beginning because we were betting that you can sell shoes on the internet. And he was an older guy saying, oh, you can't, that's not working. People don't know what they do. So did that for a while, and also moved to, back in the day, some first ideas of e-mobility. Everybody knows, I guess, Tier is known in Europe. I think in US, you have Bolt and all these different like e-scooters. And we were playing around with that idea in the very beginning, 2010, 11. But, back then we had these big Chinese e-scooters, not handy at all with a lead battery. So it was a bit too early. And so but essentially all these activities sparked the entrepreneurial interest, right? So I was looking, that was all during my PhD. So I was looking for essentially pathways to pursue that further. And in my family, so my dad is a doctor. He's a professor in the area of oncology, gastroenterology. Never wanted personally to do something with medicine, right? I was not going to do what my dad does, so typical thing. And he ventured at some point with his partner, I think a couple of years before, into clinical research. He had that connection before, and she actually founded a company in the 90s, a CRO back in the day. So I knew about that business a bit, and they sold it in 2005, I think, to a subgroup of United Health. And but in 2010, 11, she was thinking about, doing something herself again, coming out of non-compete and, being able to do something. And I got talking, right? And I think that was a great opportunity because for me, it was a way to have a mentor, to have somebody who can guide you in the question of what is it like to lead a company. After university, you have all these courses, and but it's very far away from reality. I think. I always think you would be more useful to practice some theory sessions and do some like improvisation with employees and stuff. That would teach you more than learning about like the books. And so I think that I thought was interesting. And given that I had no background in biology and any of these, let's say, more clinical research associated areas, I started in business development, right? So I decided, okay, I want to try, going into that business, having somebody with a perspective of also, being involved in the leadership of the business at some point, and started in business development, essentially being able, with a background of, business. I learned about presentations. I knew how to build an argument, which is important in business development. We have these consulting presentations that we do in business school. They help a lot. That's not an approach that gets taught to chemists, biologists, and so on. They're more they have a different approach, more scientific, right?
So you're talking about the framework you're talking about, right? For
you want to sell a project, right? You want to win a bid. So I think that's what I could bring to the table is, okay, what's the audience? What is the problem? How can we solve this? How do we structure the presentation? How we build it, even, working in PowerPoint and having some way to use illustrations that fit the narrative, and also building a narrative. I think that's what I could do in the very beginning. What brought me into the business of the CRO world in the first place. And I started in a very academic environment. So IIT, so academic studies. It was not international CRO world. It was really scientific, and essentially we were selling ideas to pharma companies. And I remember the expectation is that it's a very serious business, right? you're talking about patients, you're talking about, and it was oncology, right? So even more serious. It wasn't about some flu or something. And I remember one of the first meetings about discussing some project was sitting there, and they were discussing about how many biopsies you would take to be able to find some good, good way to measure some biomarker. And they were discussing whether it's 1 or 2 or 3. And somebody said, well, why don't we take 4? And everybody was laughing. I was like, what's going on? Because they were saying, well, then the tumor is gone. Oh, no, we can't do it that way. So, I also learned that a business also it's scientific, very human driven. So it's still the people that count. And it's about the connections that you make in the sales business. And so from then on, I essentially learned about oncology, other indications as you go from the BD position in the very beginning, that also moving into finance, which, was one of my areas at university. So I was active in finance in the business, saw that from that standpoint, how to budget a study, how to basically trace the profitability, and then onwards to more technical parts, which was also something that I explored. Because, coming from this IT background, I was interested in seeing and surprised to see more, let's say, legacy systems being developed and still in place in 2013, 14, when you had all these e-commerce platforms with nice cloud-based software, usability that was very different what you would see there, right? So that's also interesting for me and something I ventured in the area of data management. What kind of systems should be in place to make the whole data collection process more efficient, along with others at the same time. And so, to shorten that bit, the journey, encapsulated different areas, right? So BD, finance, data management, safety management. So the more technical aspects gave me some oversight, right? And that's the area I stayed in over the years, and became then also part of the management team along the way. Entering in 2017 around the management board, and then moving along till today, I'm the managing director of the company. So that would be the short story.
I appreciate you walking us through your journey, and like just such a diverse background you had, obviously, before you got into clinical trials and research. So maybe I think I want to transition into this question about, we talked a little bit about on our earlier call, like about academic research versus research that's funded by industry. And then within the industry funded research, there's the industry sponsored research and then the investigator sponsored research, right? So it's kind of, it splits again. So maybe based on the experience you had on the academic side earlier, and then kind of also now that you're in this role as a managing director at Palleos, wanted to hear your thoughts about like what challenges or what differences or similarities have you seen in academic research versus research that's funded by industry, and then maybe we can go another level deeper into IIS, which is investigator-sponsored research versus industry-sponsored research.
Yeah, sure. I think you could look at it like a spectrum, right? On the very extreme of academic research, let's say the extreme IIT, where an investigator follows essentially interest and finds somebody, right? It always looks like, and that's my experience with some protocols that I've seen, or first drafts of protocols, is let's solve all the world problems in that specific area that we are in, right? So you have a primary endpoint, but you have, I don't know how many secondary endpoints.
Like a million, yeah.
Like a million, right? To solve all the questions that are very interesting to the investigator and very difficult to actually execute with the funds that you have, and questionable in terms of the validity of your results, because usually it's not powered, right? So it's interesting exploratory research. But I would say, the most extreme on the academic side of things is let's solve the world problems or my personal interests in that area. That's how these studies look like. And on the other side, what they assume is like time is money. Pretty much for the pivotal studies that you have on the commercial side of things, you want to hit every timeline, because every month, every day on the road to registration, on getting something to market, is very, very expensive. So I think these are the different sides, right? So I think that I would say are the different extremes, and these have consequences along the way. So if you're working with a protocol that is loaded with all different kinds of questions, it gets very muddy. It gets very difficult to manage, because you can imagine that a data collection instrument, an ECRF, that has to take care of so many questions, that is not that focused in terms of the data that's being collected, is much more difficult to manage. What data points do you focus on? Do you want 100% completeness, 100% SDV? What do you want to really collect, right? So that turns into issues in data collection and then evaluation with missing values and all these kind of things later on down the line. And sometimes gives you some muddy results because the initial question was so broad that it was very difficult with the often limited funds in the IIT world to actually get everything delivered, right? And that results in, I'd say, sometimes stress and problems with the sites, because also for them it's more difficult to collect everything, and it's often a very, let's say, motivational aspect that makes these studies successful, right? It's more about the fame, the publication, essentially, what can I get out as an academic to advance my career, besides helping patients, of course, and how and where can I publish this best? That is the value here that is at play, right? And you play towards that goal a lot when working with investigators and when setting up these studies. And this is the incentives that also the pharma companies that fund these projects, that they set. They want you to publish the work. Well, on the other side, if you have a pivotal phase 2, phase 3, like an important study, the publication is not the most important aspect. It's getting the right result, most likely in a way that's safe, so very low risk in the design of the study and how you set it up, very quick recruitment, probably at an expense of spending like more money to get that done, right? But it results also in different issues, right? So it results in, I think, more pressure in the study execution, in more demands to the professionals working on the project. It's different people doing that, and much more operational excellence than in the other, which is more scientific excellence. And also has consequences in terms of how you manage the study, in terms of your financial controls, in terms of your project management approach, and also in the site selection. You probably are selecting sites that are high recruiters with some key opinion leaders to have these voices in your publication and your dissemination of knowledge efforts as well. But that's much more the focus. Getting the recruitment patients in time for the primary endpoint that is relevant for the registration.
Yeah, I like how you said it's a spectrum, and I completely agree and understand. Like, it's kind of moving from left to right. So with the academic side, obviously, you said they were not powered, but they could still power the endpoints, right? If they wanted to. Like, are they not? Is it just because they're not?
You power the study, with 80% power, you do that. But the further secondary endpoints you set, the further analysis you do, the more difficult, an interpretation gets, right? It's not powered. Obviously, you do for the primary endpoint. You wouldn't get through any regulatory body without doing that.
Yes.
But the side quests, if you would speak that way, are also very important, because the usability of the research in getting like a secondary publication, to looking also at this specific marker and that specific marker, and have, let's say, a lot of usability academically, just publishing all different kind of work, not just a primary publication, but a variance of things. And we looked, next to survival, we looked at the survival of this subgroup and that subgroup that, I don't know, had that specific marker, right? So there's a lot used to academics to be relevant from a publication standpoint and have reusability of the data, which is less so, as I see it, the case for a straight, registration study.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do have this one question in my head about the academic desire to publish, like for the doctors, like they want to publish the results for the academic career. And I wonder is it because like they can get from an assistant professor to an associate professor to a full professor based on how many publications they do, or is there something else? I talked to a professor at Stanford not too long ago, and I was like, what are you going to get out of this? And he's like, well, bragging rights. And that was kind of his response to me. But I'm curious if there's other things that I'm not fully understanding, they get out of this. I mean, I think, yes, we should publish. I think that's always a good thing to do, but I'm also trying to figure out how it helps them.
I can't speak for the US American market and how it works. But in Germany, the publications are a currency, right? So the way it works is you have certain ranks. I won't name that; it's not important. But you apply for them, you change, for a higher rank. And one of the key elements of your evaluation is what publications in what peer-reviewed journal with what citation, degree.
I see. Count.
So it is quintessential. If you had a good publication or a very good publication in Nature and New England Journal of Medicine, it will really advance your career, because you have visibility for yourself just to industry, right? I mean, if you look at smaller biotechs, how they kind of find their key opinion leaders. And I see that, and I experienced it a lot when working with these study groups. They will look through, I don't know, breast cancer, that and that.
Right.
There will be one or two people in Germany or in Europe or worldwide that will show up every time. And who are they going to get in touch with? Yes,
those two.
Opinion leader. And so for them, that's a very privileged position. They will be in touch with all the primary new developments in terms of drug or whatever area they're in. So I think that's one part for them.
Yeah.
The university also kind of provides or gets recognition for the professors that work there, right? So if they have the leaders in their field with a high citation score for everyone that's there, that's very attractive. So that's how the machine works. That's their currency, I would say.
Yeah, I love how you explained it.
How much have you done in your field compared to the others? And that is measured through the publications.
Makes sense. In your experience, at least want to hear what you have to say. Have the clinical trial protocols become more complex or less complex over the years, like the last 5 to 10 years?
Good question. I think both.
Yeah.
From the beginning when I started in 2011 till, let's say, the last ICH GCP amendment, the R2, also the risk management approaches, I think there was a lot of professionalization in the industry. You had Transcelerate working on a protocol design and other organizations too. So a lot of standardization took place. For the clinical study reports, you have standards. And also, even in the academic field, it became more more a requirement to have a standard of protocols and also the CSRs, because the pharma companies were starting to say, look, you have to adhere to certain standards. That started in terms of the reporting and the protocol design, but now ended up that you have to provide your data sets in SDTM format and so on. Standardization permeates coming from industry, from commercial side of things, from the regulators. It permeates through industry down to the academics, right? It also manifests in a different way. When I started, and I heard that from my father and also his wife, that 10, 15 years before, it was even different. Every investigator had their own trial. They were writing their own protocols. That pretty much doesn't, at least in Germany, doesn't exist anymore. You have study groups that are somewhat professional because you can just not do it on the side to the standard that is now required. So I think, the complexity has decreased in the sense that there's more standardization, which makes it more clear in terms of what is in the protocol, what is expected, and how can I read it in a standardized way. However, it also has become more complex. So, for example, with the new requirements in terms of getting your critical processes, critical data, so the risk management involved, I think there's added complexity because you're now adding the process level to the protocol, which requires a deeper understanding of the protocol writing process as a professional, and I think makes writing the protocol a more complex task. At the same time, sorry, go ahead.
So are you seeing like companies like following those standards as it relates to like protocol writing, report writing? Is that something you're seeing right now? All the templates that Accelerate has on their website, are people like actually using them? You think?
I wouldn't say one-to-one, but what I see is that, instead of in the past, sometimes copying a protocol from another study, changing it into whatever you are looking for, people are more so working from templates, right?
Templates,
They will work based on the templates from Accelerate. They work on other templates wherever they get them from, right?
Yep.
I think that in the end leads to a more robust, let's say, template structure overall in the industry.
Absolutely.
And I think another thing that, at least here in Europe is happening, you have to provide, for example, different reports to different stakeholders, right? So you have a patient report that needs to be written in a different way so the patient can understand how the study turned out and so on. So I think the regulators also are trying to speak to different stakeholders in a different way and therefore making it more transparent to a broader audience, right? So that all is just something that underlines the professionalization that happens there.
Is there a resource in Europe that, I know we were talking about trying to accelerate, but is there other organizations that provide templates that you're aware of that people can use for their projects in Europe?
Yeah, many. I don't know all of them by heart, but I can start also because I'm a member. So we have, for example, the BDMA, which is the German Association of CROs, and they are working strongly on different templates, and that is templates for contracts with sites. These are all kinds of different templates that, based on their expertise and the expertise of the industry, are created for the community of CROs to be used to have a standardization in there, right?
Yeah.
There are quite some different organizations that work on their templates. We have the DIA with their TMS. Depending what organization you look for, there's a lot of organizations providing standardizations, not only protocols, but all kinds of areas. Yeah.
Yeah. So the BDMA, I'd never heard of them. So thank you for sharing. And you said DIA also?
Yeah, they have, so there's DIA standard for the ETMF, right? So they have the standard index. And yeah, CDISC, everybody knows, right? Also a standardization. And there are many more that I've shortly touched, for risk-based approaches to monitoring beyond the Transcelerate one. So there's quite some organizations that do that.
Okay.
And we have journals that do this, right? So yes, that's quite a bit.
Yeah. Also, I think the European Union website has certain report templates that they want people to use also. Yeah. I think it's called the Medical Coordinating Group or something, MDCG, if I'm not mistaken. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is this is, we were talking about we were talking about pivotal studies, and it's kind of a dance where you're trying to figure out the budget and the scientific complexity, and how you want to balance that, and with timelines. So how do you kind of go about thinking through that, or how do you solve that issue where, yes, you want the trial to be 80-90% powered, but at the same time you want it to be as least expensive as possible, and you want to make it go as fast as possible, and want to have as many endpoints as possible. So how do you kind of juggle all those things, or how have you seen those things get addressed or pan out, generally speaking, maybe, or specifically, either way?
Yeah, I think, not to use that phrase too much, but there's never a free lunch, right? So I think it is in a situation where, as a CRO, you're working with a biotech or with a client, doesn't matter. There's always the triangle between time, budget, and then the quality, sort of scope of quality. And I have never seen an organization that can do all of them, that has enough time, a huge budget, and a huge scope. It's usually one or the other that falls short, right? So for a biotech, for example, they're usually short on resources. They have requirements for timelines, because most of their financing is built, or some of the financing is built on hitting a first patient in, or some milestones in the clinical trial to get more funding. And so they always have to pick their fight in terms of, what do I focus on, and how do I cleverly manage this kind of classical triangle of a project to achieve my goals, right? So I think as a CRO, our business is to provide strategies and be honest about how realistic they are to achieve those goals, right? So, for example, we as a company that works in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, we get approached often by companies, let's say in the smaller biotech sphere, that cannot, like a Pfizer or like a Roche, say, okay, we go US 40 sites, Germany, France 20, and then in Japan. It just doesn't work. It's too expensive, it's too competitive, right? So they have to look for solutions. And what they look for is an interesting mix, often for example, Eastern European countries that have a good match, either based on their standard of care, based on what kind of patients they have, or just the cost in these countries to their requirements. So we come up with a strategy that fits their requirements in terms of the budget, maybe speed, because we can provide the Eastern European countries. Also speed, because we are not like a big CRO that, has 20, 30 departments working on a trial and then sitting next to two people that run this biotech. No, we're on the same side of size, right? So I think our job is to be honest about what we can achieve, and what is realistic. Where are the boundaries of, let's say, their ambitions and their goals in their constraints, and the realities out there that we can deliver, and find for them a strategy that works, right? That fits the quality that they need for their study. It's the timelines, but also the budget. It's not always possible. But that's the approach, right? Finding a strategy with them together where they can achieve their goals.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So having basically conversations and understanding like what really their data needs are to get them to the next
Yeah, the
step in the
data
process.
needs, correct. Also, maybe even the study design, right? That's sometime a discussion. What kind of study design do I take? I mean, for example, you can, the classic ways, you can just go for a study that focuses on a certain endpoint, you do the recruitment, and you get the readout in the end, right? It's very straightforward and very classical. But you can also go for design that has 1, 2, 3, some interim analysis that gives you the capability to stop the trial earlier. It's more complex, it will be more costly, but it might save you money if your effect isn't there, and finding it early at time point then might be appropriate, right? So it's okay, what is the right target area to do this in? What kind of design makes sense for you with the risk appetite that you have? Are you going the risk of having to discuss something with the authorities because they will not straight away say, yes, great design, we know it, let's go? No, they want to understand it first. And do you have the trust in the organization, in the CRO, to actually go that path and that extra step and benefiting from it later on?
Yeah, makes sense. Want to maybe transition a little bit more into like your role as a managing director. So, and you also mentioned like you're responsible for the finances, but also like you have to kind of execute on the projects, right? Or make sure your team executes on the projects that are kind of that fall within. So how do you manage like being profitable while investing in like innovation and talent development? How do you go about thinking like that? I feel like I'll tell you my reason for that question. I think a lot of the early career people in research, they may not fully understand or appreciate what a life of a managing director is. So I kind of wanted to pull the curtain a little bit for them and kind of explain them there is there's a huge financial component to a lot of this. So whatever information or insights you can share that will help these people, I think would be much appreciated.
That's a big question. I think I consider a company like a big system with subsystems. And that's the way I try to think of it, right? So like having a big house with different, columns. You have a finance column, that's a perspective you can take on the organization. You have an operational column, right? How you execute, how the processes work. You have a technology column, what tools do you use to run the processes on, and so on, right? You can go through all the functions. And I think the role of a managing director has different components. It has one, to be able to oversee the system and understand who's owning which system, and what are their responsibilities, how are they doing it, and then taking a perspective on these systems from these different perspectives, right? So if you have a finance perspective, that means how profitable am I in certain areas of the organization? What costs do I have in these areas of the organization? How is the organization set up in terms of the resources? That's the view in the past, right? You have to understand like your current organization, how it evolved from the past. And then the second point is you want to look into the future, right? So I think that's for me always the more exciting part, because you can bring in your ideas and your fantasy, and also your image of the future, right? So you have to consider all these different questions: is how do I finance the growth, the business in the future? How do I think the business changes? We're talking about AI and so on. There's a big changes coming. How it's a service, it's a people's business. How is the labor market changing? How difficult or how easy will it be to recruit people? how competitive is the situation, and how can I stand out in this competitiveness, right? So I think you, in a typical week, I would say, of a managing director, in different meetings that you set in your communication structure over a month, whatever you like, right? You run through these different perspectives. You talk to people that tell you these projects are running well because, and you get an idea. You look through the different numbers telling you this is how the last month went, this is how the last 6 months went. You run through different ideas on how technology will change the business, can be implemented. So basically, you build a collective image of your organization that you then have to all the time, let's say, make like a homogeneous, like total system, like have an idea, this is how it is, and break down again to the different subsystems. And I think probably a bit of a technocratic way of saying it, but this up and down, like being on the high bird's eye perspective, diving down into the details to understand a bit what is actually going on, what are people doing in the organization, and then emanating that outside to the customer, to you in a podcast, and understanding that feedback as well to bring into the organization. I think that somewhat is the role of the managing director, and making the decisions connected to it based on the information you get, right? There's a great image. I think it was a discussion of the founders of YouTube that said you can go through a different set of problem solving settings. You have the normal clerk. You give them a script and they basically execute the script. There's no transfer of knowledge, like transferable ideas that you have to execute, right? Then next step is you give them a problem, and with a certain tools, they can kind of solve that problem. But it's a clear boundary in which they solve that problem.
Sure.
Then the next, you can go further and say, okay, now you give them an area and they have to identify the problems, delegate to the problem solvers that then in that specific corner have to solve the problems, and so on. The highest level is you have to identify your area, your business area, identify then the business problems, and delegate down to the people that, execute down the line, right? So I think as a managing director, that is, I think, the most difficult thing. You have no real boundary. You have to set yourself the boundaries of the business, financially speaking, professionally speaking, what your people can do, what the organization can take or not take, and that navigate that between the customer, your employees, and other stakeholders to basically also make the right decisions in business.
Makes sense. In your organization or from, are you currently is there, or do you have any experience with any sort of risk sharing models with sponsors? And then also how has this evolved over the last few years?
We attempted to do this again and again, honestly. But we never found a model that actually really worked. There is risk sharing, like in a simple way in some projects. Like if you had a target early, you get 2% more. If you hit a target late, you get a penalty. But all very straightforward. I always thought, realistically, if you start with a budget that you provide to a client, it's always wrong because you're saying this is on the euro the budget that it will be. Everybody knows it's dead wrong, certain that it's wrong, right? Realistically, you're on a distribution in terms of a probability. It might be a bit more, it might be a bit less. And so from a perspective of a budget creation, with other partners, we tried in the past a pathway saying, look, why don't we're talking about risk management all the time. Why don't we do a risk-based budget? What does it mean? Essentially, you have a distribution you can break it down to the last point, it doesn't make sense, but for certain areas, you have a risk distribution. Your statistical report will be pretty predictable, but your recruitment time, different question, right? There is certainly a variance in there. And so based on the data you have available, you can pretty much give you a spectrum. What is the range it could cost? And then if you find a client that is willing to get into a conversation of how that can be built in into a budget, that would be an interesting conversation. But it never happened, because I think the complexity of executing this is
Very
difficult.
high. Yeah.
It's very high because there are downsides for one side. You are doing the calculation for the budget, so who's telling that you're not skewing the budget again, right? So the reliability in the end, if it's truly the case, I don't know, but the visible transparency and reliability, if you have one number is higher for that counterparty than if you go on a spec, right? So yeah, I think risk sharing that's a very interesting approach, but I think it's hardly doable if you have two parties that have their own business interests and are not part of one entity. So the degree of collaboration that can happen is so limited in the end because they're different interests, right?
I also think there's a lot of external variables that neither parties can control. Like sometimes it's the regulatory piece, sometimes it's the sites, sometimes it's, there's a lot of things that are kind of beyond like you do an interim analysis and now you find out something has changed completely for your project, and that throws away that whole risk sharing.
Yes. So
sorry, you were trying to say something. Apologies for interrupting.
No, I was just saying that beyond like the classical models that pre-financing some of it, plus minus X percentage, I haven't seen much, and we're actually not doing that often. I guess rather having an agreement about the initial budget that both parties think is reasonable, and then essentially discuss the risks along the way, right? They happen, and then you discuss with your client, is that something you're responsible for? Is that something that is out of your control? And act accordingly and change the budget through change orders as these risks actually come into reality.
Come into play. Yep, exactly. We started, you were mentioning about AI, and that's kind of, we're seeing a wave of all of the AI tools and technologies. Do you currently use any as a CRO in your business? If so, like what's your process to evaluate these tools and framework for implementing them?
Yeah, I think first off, we have to differentiate what we mean with it. I think our statistics team is using AI for a long time in terms of different machine learning algorithms and other approaches.
Sure.
In the field for like a long time, right?
Yeah.
So on that side, I think we have done a lot for 10 years or more. Then if you are talking about LLMs, which was probably what most of people are connecting with the current AI wave, right? So large language models like ChatGPT and others, that we are also experimenting with. In Europe, it's a bit of a tricky thing because most of the big players are in the US, and we have a GDPR, data protection setup, that kind of makes it difficult, let's say, to work with these tools without breaking the law, or at least being in a gray area, right?
Right.
Yeah, but with the open source movement, what happens now, and we are going into that, is that you have basically your private environments with the models in place. You can pick any model, right? And I think that's a very interesting thing because the CRO world is in a privileged position. We have documented our processes. Not every industry has done that to a degree as we do. So what you can actually do, imagine setting up your I don't know, data management plan, whatever plan. In the past, right? So you would copy the template and probably it's quite some work, right? And I think we're not far away. It's working pretty well, that you can load up your template, put in your protocol, and pretty much have the AI write most of it. You will have to QC it and work through it, but the standard, like, rather, let's call it the boring part, right? Just copying essentially things from the protocol to these plans, right? That are repeating some areas, that are just, the shell of the whole thing, and not the strategy that's actually in there. That's just a couple of parts. That can be automated, and with agents and so on, these processes will get better and better, right?
Sure.
So I think that's something that will certainly change the industry quite a bit, because the processes are so well documented, and some of them can be automated to a high degree. So that's what I expect there to happen. There are other things that people we're talking to, not that we are using it yet, but there's AI tools for protocol writing, right? Where you essentially just define the core elements, which is, the design, the endpoints, and so on. All the rest is being written by the tool automatically. And you have basically an existing protocol that does all the change management, all the tracking for versioning through the whole protocol if you do changes. So checks consistency. So there's a lot of automation going on. You just have to focus on the core parameters or elements that are relevant, and the rest is being done and also QC checked by the system. So these are like the typical things I expect to happen. And being in place, right? So automation of processes that are well documented. Because we are so standardized, I think that is for us a good thing this time.
I love it. I think you made me think a lot on this. I think when I was thinking about like AI tools, like one thing I thought of is like you have a set of prompts that you feed into the AI, and then the AI will ask you those questions. You answer all those questions, and then it will generate a data management plan or monitoring plan for you. But what you're saying is you can actually like also upload your templates and then your protocol, and then it will generate a monitoring plan.
You upload your SOP, you upload your templates, you upload your mother SOP, and you can tell. I mean, it's still early, right? But technically, it's possible. There are some weaknesses, and you have to do double like QC checks for sure, right? But we are so early, right? So I think it's just a question of time until there's some professional solution doing this, or some software company does this, provides this as a solution out of the box, right? Give us your processes, it will work. Another thing I think with the LLM models is that I think a lot of I think you say moats in the US are breaking down. So for example, in Europe, it would be very difficult to find out quickly how certain standard of care and so on, for example, as a German, are set up in France. It's a French language, you don't know where to look, right? So it's very difficult to find out basic things, right? Because you need to know the language, you need to know where to look. You need to know the association that published them and so on. So it takes time. That was a real protection for like the local companies because they had this knowledge already. It takes time to build it up. Right now, I can ask, in France, what is the standard of care for this stuff? And it just gives it to me. And it's mostly right. We checked this, right? I love it. It gives good answers. So you have like the knowledge gaps become lower. So let's say everything that's public domain will be more accessible if you know how to access it. And if you have the right controls, right? Because we know there's this hallucination stuff. You can also put in wrong things, right? So you have to do your check. And I think that that is something that really like levels the field a bit. And if you add then the internal data with likely your local LLM, then can help you basically to enrich your own processes and outputs, right? Just imagine like a BD person who gets a request for proposal. The requests for proposals look like from a 40-page document which outlines every detail to just a 5-liner email. Hey, we need a bioequivalence study. Too short, right? And so they spend time aggregating, analyzing, giving an output to the team that's then actually working on RFP. I can put in a standard prompt and just have them upload all the information there, add the data that they get from the document, tell the prompt, everything else, make a task list to ask the client. There's so much you can do in terms of standardizing these simple things, right? That are just out of just the basic human interaction, different quality levels that these RFPs have.
Yeah.
That so much time that you can expedite like crazy when you have the processes in place with the LLMs.
Is there like a AI course or something that you like a resource that you found useful for the work you do? Or like just for learning?
I never took an AI course. I watched podcasts. I listened to podcasts. There are some like more deep technical ones that I enjoy.
Okay.
So I think I just engage with it a lot. If I see on LinkedIn people that are working on things that I find interesting, I talk to them, right? So
I see.
People working on LLMs in their company, they have already implemented that stuff. You can talk to them and ask them, how are you doing it? And they have a wealth of information to share. So I think that's how I approach it. I find it exciting. So I think that helps too. But I wouldn't have like one source.
That's okay. Do you want to name the podcast that you kind of, if there's a favorite one you have in mind or you've listened to multiple times?
So the one I actually find interesting because it has some technical discussions is with Lex Friedman. He had a couple of discussions with AI experts. Just recently, that's more technical. Then, I forgot the name. There's some German ones that are more generic, but I would say most of the real AI podcasts with specialists with the Lex Friedman podcast.
Okay, perfect. That's helpful. Thank you for sharing. Want to transition into like some leadership questions around like just as a leader in the CRO space, what skills do you believe are most critical for the next like 5 to 10 years? I think, at least I'll kind of tell you like my perspective, and a lot of like we talk about AI and automation and so on. I feel like a lot of the CRA jobs are not CRA, but a lot of jobs. I feel like the monitoring landscape is changing or will change quite rapidly in how monitoring is done. At least in the United States, there's remote monitoring, there's risk-based monitoring, and then people are also going to on-site, and I feel that on-site dynamic is going to change quite a bit. It's already changing or has changed, but I also think people are going to do fewer on-site visits because there's just no need to do this anymore. At least that's my perspective and read on this. But I'm curious, what do you have to say, just in skill sets in general, and also maybe you can touch on the monitoring example I just shared.
So I think overall, the role of the CRO will drastically change. Well, in the past, I think the CRO has been some service provider between the sites and the sponsor, right? So there's a lot of transactional things that the the CRO does between the site in terms of data collection, data structuring, and so on, communication, quality, to deliver a result to the sponsor. This was a very people's-driven business, right? So CRAs in the center with their visits, 100% SDV. That's the need to manage. How many visits you can do per CRA, per week, per month.
Exactly.
That will drive your profitability. I don't think think that is the future role of the CRO. I think the CRO in the future will rather be the technological broker, if you will. Because I think that's the challenge in the future. You have all kinds of different systems at the site. Every country has the different rules in terms of how you can transfer and when and what data you can transfer into different systems. Also, the sponsors have different systems that they use to kind of work on the data, right? Also, the context of the data changes. While you had little islands, which are the clinical trials in the past, I think sponsors are more interested to aggregate and find things in a more broader spectrum, right? So in the future, and I will come to your monitoring example in a second, it is about having the right technology background to basically manage all the interfaces that you have between the site, the patient, and the sponsor. And that not only entails, an EDC system or maybe in a direct integration into the electronic health record system the hospital runs, but also whatever fitness tracker the patient has, what device and direct data collection happens at the patient level, right? So I think that in the future will be the key scenario, right? So you have as a CRO overview of the key data in the clinical trial or whatever you're doing, and your task now is to use that data to find problems in correctness, in completeness, in whatever quality dimension you can think of, and that also includes monitoring, right? So your example, and I think that's what Transcelerate found out, that essentially most of the data will never be changed. It is correct from the beginning. There's only a small part that will be changed and will be crucial for actual the final result in the quality of the data. So that's why they say focus on the important processes and important data, which leads then to the risk-based monitoring approach that just tackles that exact problem, right? So you will see a decrease in monitoring on site at the same level that we can increase the site integration with, direct electronic health record integration and all other integrations we can possibly think of. So I think that's where the industry is going. I don't know how fast that's going to be, because, for example, in Germany, I don't know, in the US, it's a bit different. I think you have a very complete electronic health record integration. Here, it's not the case. You have different providers. APIs are not open, so data protection is an issue. So it is very difficult to get a direct integration going in Germany. So
I see.
I don't know how regulation will kind of impact that development, but I think it will be that way at some point, right?
Sure. Great. Just to wrap up our conversation, I want to maybe talk a little bit about the books or resources that have influenced like the way you think and your leadership philosophy over the years. It's probably one of my favorite questions that I like to ask.
Yeah, I thought it's a difficult question because you asked the way I think. And it's very hard to pin down the books that really have influenced the way I think. I'm not sure. I would say there are books that I'd say that have influenced me. I remember them and say, this is something that I thought about a lot. But if you ask the question, the way I think, it's very difficult. But, okay.
Maybe I think my question was the influence part or the way you think. So
okay.
you could pick one or both.
Okay. Yeah, so I think one that everybody names, I read it and I think it's very straightforward and it helped me really simple ways is high output management. From the Intel guy, what is his name? Andy something, yes. Because he is really straightforward in explaining how a business works. He has the stupid toaster example and to explain processes. and concept like 101s, just simple tools to understand how he thinks a business can be managed. I thought it was helpful to just have something you can start with.
Right.
You don't start in the business with the concept of a one-on-one. You don't. You talk to people, right? So having that as a template, I think was very interesting, and helped me a bit in kind of gaining a perspective on business.
Sure.
What else? Then I think another. I think it's a series of books. Was sorry, I have something in my eye. It's called Extreme Management, right? So that's a guy coming from the military. He basically extreme ownership. Sorry, that's it.
Extreme ownership. Yeah.
And basically, his idea is all about accountability, right? It's something that I didn't really get in the beginning. That you can have a different understanding of what responsibility and accountability really means, and to what you can actually push that, right? What it really means to be responsible for a process, for a project, something, right? So I thought that was helpful because in the book he basically puts out the principles that he thinks is important. If you have a team that needs to have a high performance level, basically what principles you need to follow to get that done. I think it's hard to execute. It's really hard to execute. It probably needs a team to understand this concept, but I thought it was an interesting thing to understand if you want to execute and have really everybody focus on their responsibility and push towards their responsibility to get something. For that purpose, I thought this was helpful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those two books. I think those would be awesome for people to check out. Anything else?
There are other books that I found fascinating, if you want. So one that I enjoyed reading and I liked the message a lot, probably hasn't been said too often because Elon Musk likes it so much, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I really could read it 1,000 times. It has so many frequencies. And by showing just on that scale that the most important thing is asking the right question, I think it's just a great book because it has humor, and basically the absurdity how he did that philosophy. I think is a great read, and it's a fun idea on thinking about how to approach problems and gaining perspective on where you live or where you currently active and how others maybe think about your project, your world, and so on. So that is one. I think if you're a science fiction fan, that's a great one. And if not, even then, it's a great one as well.
It's a series of books, is that right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But I like.
I've never heard of that one, but thank you for sharing.
And then I think one that I really like, also because my son is partially named after him, is Little Prince from Antoine-Exupéry. It's a French writer, which it's a child's book, but it has so many little nooks for grown-ups in it. I don't know if you know it much in the US, but in Europe it's well known. And essentially,
the Little Prince, is that what it's called? Or
yes, that's what it's called. And it's
The Little Prince by Richard Howard and Antoine. Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I. So your son, you said you named your son after the author, or I suppose, is that what you're saying?
One of his name, first, the second name is Antoine. Yes,
oh, cool, awesome! I did the same for my son. Off topic, but I named my son after the author Seth Godin. And Seth has written some amazing. Seth Godin has written some amazing books on marketing, of course, but just other things just related to how the world works.
Yeah. So there are other books, but I think these are the main ones that I'd name in terms of something that fascinated me in perspective also on business. Maybe in philosophy, one that is very complicated, but I like a lot. It's called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. It's about mythology. So if you're interested in mythology and a hero's journey, kind of like as an overarching principle in life, that's a book that looks at this story from all kind of different mythological backgrounds, Greek mythology, Roman, and others. So Joseph Campbell is that.
Joseph Campbell, got it. Okay. So before we wrap up, I want to go back to where we started. You mentioned about your dad and then his business partner or a friend or a colleague who ended up being your mentor. His wife. Okay. So also it's your mom. Is that your mom or no?
My stepmom, essentially. Yeah.
Stepmom. Is she? What was something that like she taught you that like really like still sticks in your head like even today? Like through your mentorship meetings, your conversations with her, what was something that really you still kind of carried with you today?
The funny thing is that when you're in a mentor-mentee relationship, it's very difficult to realize what you learned because the mentor is still there. I often think about, you have that in these heroes' journeys all the time. If you look at Star Wars, Yoda dies or whoever like dies, there's first a big despair because where's the role model, right? There was somebody who told you this is how you do this and this is how you do this and this is how it should. So now that I'm like doing it myself, I understand what I actually learned, and I think overall what I learned is I think there are some things about how you think about organizations. So the whole systems thinking approach, I think I learned from her. That's the way she kind of looked at the world.
Sure.
So I think you adopt that from your perspective and you have a different character, you have a different view in the world, right? But I think, just how you partition the world in business is one thing that I definitely learned. So how do you think about an organization? How do you structure an organization? And how do you deal with people in the organization? I think that's something I took away, certainly from that time. And then there are small things. How do you structure a meeting, right? How do you, like small little things what is a good example? You explain something to someone and then okay, thank you, and you leave. I learned from her, specifically with junior people, that they say, okay, now you're standing up. What do you do next with the information you just received? It's such a simple question, but you'd be amazed what kind of answers you get if you ask that question.
Exactly. It would be completely different.
Yes. So sometimes depending on who's sitting there, how active, silent, or what character that person is, they will not speak out. They will just say, okay, understood. So having these kind of little things to look at, being aware of the surroundings and the people, their background, I think that's also something that took away, that I learned. And
I love it.
A couple of these little things of attention, and asking simple questions to find out like an open-ended answer from the other side.
Absolutely. Right before our meeting today, I had another call with someone, and I was trying to explain to them what I would like. We're in a sticky situation with the site, and I was trying to tell the CRO, like, here's what I'd like for you to do. And I said, can you now explain me in your own words what you gathered from what we just discussed? And obviously, I think they had missed all the important details, like, just kind of exact what you're trying to share. And also like developing meetings, like leading meetings, setting up meeting agendas. I mean, it's such an important skill set, I feel, that is usually not like talked about. There is a EOS organization, Entrepreneurial Operating System, I think that's what it's called. And they have like a really nice template for meeting agendas. So I just wanted to put a plug in there for them if people wanted to be interested in checking that out. But yeah, thanks for sharing those really detailed insights about, kind of asking people what they got out of the conversation. I also heard like somewhere on a podcast, where if you and I were having a one-on-one and you were telling me something, it'd be a good idea for you to tell me, Kunal, now when you go back to your desk, why don't you type back what you gathered from our meeting, and then me like sending you that email explaining you what was like the key takeaways really helps reinforce some of those points that we discussed.
Yeah. It's amazing how those simple things like, taking meeting minutes, knowing how to do these, writing good decision points, like it's really standard stuff. How often it's not done.
I mean, I'm just laughing because, we had met like in November last year, and I think we were on a call, and then we typed a bunch of notes, and then I didn't put them on my Google Drive, and I kind of just emailed them to you. And then in January, you were asking me like about topics, and I'm like, I swear we talked about topics, and I can't remember anything right now, 2 months later. Fortunately, I had those notes from our call, which is kind of what I pulled them off and send them back to you. But so it came to my mind. It's like, this is such a crazy thing.
Yeah. Very nice.
Sorry, you were trying to say something. Is there anything you were trying to finish up?
No. I think, I just wanted to add that, it's funny that all these little nooks and things are so important. We talk about these big picture things, but in the daily life, these small attentions to detail and listening to what actually was received plays such a big role, right? So I think
absolutely
attention to detail in these daily interactions is also very important.
Yeah, so I'll link to your website when I do the show notes. But is there any place like people can find you, get in touch with you, or your company? Is there anything you'd like to share?
It's a good place. People can get in touch over LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way. Over email, of course. But I'd say LinkedIn is the best place to look for me.
Okay, perfect. I'll link your LinkedIn profile. Perfect. Thank you so much, Philip, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one. Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Clinical Trial Podcast. For more exclusive clinical research content to get you to the top of your game, head on over to clinicaltrialpodcast.com.